I send this recording in what I believe to be the last hour of my life. And if someday someone listens to this, let them understand the weight of what they are going to hear, because it is not merely the account of a dying man. It is the confession of an entire empire that believed itself immortal and was destroyed by the love of a species we underestimated. My name is Glean. I was commander of the 4th Pirti Band, the greatest among the greatest. For decades, our names were whispered as legends among smugglers and stellar assassins. We were the kings of the void. Fear bore our emblem, and the universe for a time seemed too small to contain our ambition. But the truth is that we were only tools, dirty hands of a council that pretended not to see. The rulers always knew. Every attack, every raid, every world burned. All was done under unwritten orders, silent agreements. Depending on who lost, they called it a tactical operation. Depending on who won, an interstellar crime. And we laughed, believing we were free. And then we attacked Earth. Why? Because it was easy. Because their radio signals showed a naive people, too busy with their own dramas to notice what was out there. Because they had no orbital defenses, nor fleets capable of reacting. Because they seemed fragile, and above all, because we did not understand what it meant to be human. I remember the first attack. The cities burned in silence in the vacuum, their communications crowded with pleas for help and prayers. They were not warriors, not yet. And we found it amusing. We saw Earth as fertile ground, an easy prize. We stole their technologies, captured their resources, and took thousands as prisoners. We believed that the universe had simple rules. The strong dominate, the weak disappear. But we forgot that there are forces that cannot be measured in weapons. The mistake began small, an act of boredom, perhaps of sadism. During one of the incursions, one of my soldiers grew irritated by the cry of a human baby. That sharp, insistent sound pierced through the sensors and echoed through the corridors. He pulled the trigger and silence. The mother's body bent over the baby. A simple gesture, almost instinctive. But at that moment, something in the universe changed its course. We thought it was irrelevant. They could generate more, couldn't they? For us, life was a resource. For them, it was everything. The woman shot 16 times stood up, bloody, broken, moved only by something that no weapon can contain. She tore the weapon from the soldier's hands and beat him until he turned to dust. And someone recorded that, someone transmitted it. In a few days, the scene spread through every channel, every terminal, every human colony, and then the impossible happened. Earth stopped. Mourning became order. Pain became doctrine, and a race that we called weak awoke the kind of fury that erases entire civilizations. The first sign of it was silence. They silenced commercial communications, then diplomatic ones. And afterward came the storm. The human fleets began small, improvised. Cargo ships adapted with plasma cannons and recycled shields. But what they lacked in technology, they had in determination. Every pilot flew as if there was something to avenge. Every troop fought as if there were no tomorrow. And perhaps there wasn't. And when the council tried to censor the recording, it was too late. Humanity had already turned it into a symbol. Before every assembly, every political speech, the humans played the sound of the baby crying, the shot, and the mother's scream. They began to unite not by borders, but by purpose. And when a people finds purpose, it ceases to be merely a species. It becomes a myth. I, Glean, saw that myth born. And now I see it destroy me. The smoke already invades the cabin. The ship is in flames, and the life support system failed minutes ago. But before the air runs out, I need this message to reach someone, anyone. Because what I learned too late may save other worlds. Do not attack the children of humans. Never. If you do, you will be condemning not only your fleets, but the very idea of victory itself. They fight like creatures who love more than they live, and their love is the kind that destroys entire universes. Glean's recording crossed space like a virus, breaking through censorships, blockades, and borders. It reached first the lunar colonies, then Mars, then the civil channels, and finally the screens of the entire planet. Earth stopped, literally. Traffic signals froze, transmissions fell, workers left the factories. For 7 minutes and 32 seconds, humanity watched the scene of a mother protecting her dead child in her arms. And it was in that silence that human history changed. The governments tried to react with protocol speeches, asking for calm. But there was no more room for calm. Humans did not want diplomatic answers. They wanted redemption. And when pain is collective, it transforms into a driving force. That was how the United Government of Earth was born, not by ideology, but by instinct. The nations understood that for the first time, they were not fighting among themselves. They were fighting for something that was theirs and that no one else had the right to touch. The first measures were symbolic, but powerful. Before every political session, before every speech, the sound was played, a baby crying, a gunshot, the mother's scream, then silence. The memory became ritual, and the ritual, law. In the orbital docks, that same sound echoed when a ship departed for the front. In the military academies, it was used in endurance training, to remember why they fought. And in the underground factories, where new prototypes were forged at an insane pace, engineers recorded that sound sequence inside the ship's systems, a hidden code, known only by humans, the mother's cry. It was the reminder that vengeance, for them, was not anger, it was duty. While the planet united, the universe watched with unease. The Keelan Confederation, a pragmatic reptilian species, was the first to move. They saw potential in human hatred. They knew that a war driven by emotion is chaotic, but a war driven by purpose is invincible. And thus, they began to secretly supply weapons and technology. The interception reports were clear. Humans had learned far too quickly. In months, their shipyards produced fleets equivalent to ours in decades. Ships that did not look beautiful nor elegant, but that worked. Each one with simple but terrifying names: Late Forgiveness, Burned Promise, Son of the Wind, Memory of Blood. And then came the first counteroffensive. The attack began without warning. Pirate cities were wiped from the map in minutes. Fortified bases destroyed by swarms of suicide drones. The human style was direct, brutal, without art, but efficient. I remember the first time we saw a human fleet up close. They did not hide in the darkness of space. They came with lights on, as if they wanted to be seen. As if they wanted us to know who was coming. They sent no messages. They demanded no surrender. They just came, and when they attacked, there was no hesitation. It was then that we understood true terror. They were not fighting to live. They were fighting to die with purpose. Meanwhile, on Earth, something even more unsettling was happening. Human leaders realized that it was not enough to win a war. It was necessary to justify what would come after. And they began to prepare something greater, a civilizational project. War for them was only the beginning. The Keelan, observing from afar, were fascinated. Their anthropologists began to study human psychology, trying to understand what moved that species. And the final report was as frightening as it was revealing. Human fear, said the chief scientist, is different from ours. They do not fear pain, nor death, nor suffering. They fear oblivion. That is why they fight. Not to survive, but so that their dead may be remembered. And when a species turns memory into fuel, it becomes infinite. Alliances began to form. First discrete, then inevitable. Reptilians, aviarians, mammals from distant worlds all began to realize that perhaps it was better to stand beside humans than against them. The war spread like fire and oxygen. Entire planets were devastated. Space became a floating cemetery of metal and bones. And even so, humanity advanced. At each victory, a new oath. Never again. Never again would they let anyone touch their children. Never again would they allow fear to define them. Never again would they be victims. The universe, which once mocked Earth, now whispered its name with respect and dread. And in the middle of all this, a legend was born. Admiral Nobunaga, the cold diplomat with eyes of steel. It was he who said the phrase that would seal the fate of the Pankin, Glean's pirates. They killed our children, and we do not negotiate with those who kill our children. Those words traveled faster than any fleet. And in little time, what remained of the Pankin was not an army, it was dust. The humans took no prisoners. They did not occupy territories. They did not colonize the ruins. They simply erased. When the war ended, the silence that remained was not peace. It was the sound of something new being born. Humanity, for the first time, looked at the universe and realized no one would ever again dare to underestimate a people who fought in the name of their dead. But deep down, in the innermost part of human voices, there was a whisper, a question that no one wanted to answer. If we were capable of such fury for love, what else are we capable of doing? The day the Pankin surrendered was not celebrated on Earth. There were no parades, no fireworks, no triumphant speeches. The image of the treaty signing, a kneeling, exhausted creature before a human diplomat, was shown only once. After that, the video was archived, as if even the victors felt shame for what they had become. The war had ended. But the human victory was not an achievement, it was a scar. The Pankin, once lords of 27 worlds, were reduced to shepherds and farmers. Their engines were shut down, their routes blocked, their cities deactivated one by one until the towers collapsed upon themselves, covered in dust and silence. Earth decreed that the survivors would live in agrarian societies. No engine, no space jump, no weapon. The message was clear: your past is over. And yet the punishment was not only retribution, it was a warning. Each burned planet became a visible reminder. This is what happens when someone touches our children. The Pankin went extinct slowly, devoured by their own hopelessness. Meanwhile, the human colonies flourished over their ruins. Fertile worlds, shallow oceans, shaped atmospheres. From the soil soaked in blood, green fields and shining factories arose. But there was a question hanging in the air. How did a nearly extinct species manage to grow so quickly? The answer was as simple as it was disturbing: cloning. In the beginning, it was a practical solution. Human losses had been massive, billions dead in a decade of war. It was necessary to repopulate, rebuild, occupy. But soon, cloning ceased to be mere replacement. It became expansion. In immense orbital banks, human DNA was stored, replicated, modified. Each colony produced its own inhabitants. Clones received accelerated education, pre-formatted memories, and were given to pioneer families who raised them as legitimate children. A new cycle began. One family generated 5, who generated 5, who generated 5 more. And in a few decades, what once was a wound became a demographic empire. President James Stoneworth Jackson, hero of the Reconstruction, said in his speeches, "The war taught us the price of oblivion. Now we build so that no one will ever dare erase us again." And the universe watched, silent, as human multiplication turned into inevitable geometry. 10 colonies became 100. 100 became 1,000. In half a century, the former Pankin territory was a mosaic of human cities connected by warp networks. The other species began to grow uneasy. The Keelan, allies in the war, now watched with a mix of pride and apprehension. The Keelan High Speaker recorded in his reports, "Humans are walking paradoxes. They build monuments to the dead and at the same time plan new wars. They speak of peace but manufacture cannons. They clone children and call them hope. Perhaps they do not understand that peace itself requires limits." In interplanetary assemblies, the topic repeated, how to contain human expansion without provoking another war. But the problem was that humans did not advance through direct conquest. They occupied the void. Every abandoned planet, every forgotten station, every ancient ruin, all was restored, colonized, inhabited. Space was not being taken by force. It was being filled. And no one knew how to stop them. As the decades passed, Earth ceased to be the center. It became a symbol. The true power now came from the colonies. Each one self-sufficient, each one connected to the other by jump networks. And to administer this new empire, humanity created something unprecedented: the Council of Hegemony, a distributed government where each world had a voice, but the final word was still Earth's. It was in this setting that Madison Maxwell appeared, the soldier with a bionic eye, successor to Jackson. In his inauguration speech, delivered under the red sky of Mars, he said, "We showed courage in war. Now we must show honor in peace. We are no longer a planet, and we are a civilization. And the universe must understand that the time of gods is over. Only the time of humans remains." The words echoed like thunder across distant systems. For some, they sounded like promise. For others, like threat. The High Lord Avan of the avian species Golian was one of the first to express concern. They replace leaders as one changes the course of a wind. They are unpredictable, adaptable, and that is what frightens the most. But Maxwell was clear. We do not seek wars, but peace. We uphold it with armed hands. 100 years after the fall of the Pankin, the galactic map had changed. Human space extended through 12 sectors and 109 inhabited worlds. Each planet had a motto engraved on its surface, a laser phrase visible from space, so that we may never be hunted again. Golian explorers reported seeing the same words on isolated moons, distant colonies, abandoned stations. It was like a prayer or a warning. Alien scientists began to study the origin of that determination. And they discovered what humans themselves rarely said aloud. They were the result of an almost extinction. 200,000 years ago, a climatic catastrophe almost erased the species from Earth. Only 5,000 individuals remained, hunters and nomads, who survived not by strength, but by endurance. They ran until the enemy died of exhaustion. They hunted until the world yielded. And that genetics persisted. Humans were long-duration predators. They did not give up, nor did they lose breath. They do not stop, wrote a Keelan biologist. When a human decides to hunt, he does not stop until the universe yields. And then the Empire began to face a new kind of silence. One that did not come from enemies, but from time itself. Peace had lasted too long. And for a species shaped by struggle, too much peace is the same as boredom, and boredom the same as danger. It was in this vacuum of purpose that the sensors detected something at the edges of the Halcyon sector. A pale blue glow, constant, anomalous, and no one knew that within that glow something was watching them back. The hegemony sensors recorded the phenomenon for the first time as a calculation error, a bluish glow on the edges of the Halcyon sector, persistent, soft, impossible to catalog. It did not come from a star nor from a nebula. It was as if space itself emitted light. At first, astronomers thought it was a natural distortion, perhaps the remnant of a malformed space fold. But over time, they realized that the light did not move, did not disperse. It pulsed, alive, rhythmic, almost breathing. The reconnaissance fleet sent was small, composed of 3 cruisers and 1 scientific frigate. They called the mission Eternal Resolve. None of them returned. Only fragments of data launched back into space as if someone or something had returned them on purpose. In the black boxes, distorted images, a colossal structure of dark metal slowly rotating around a void. It was impossible to measure its size. From a distance, it looked like a planet. Up close, it looked infinite. A double ring with entire cities fixed to its surface, motionless, frozen in time. The first analysts thought it was an abandoned station, perhaps the remnant of an extinct civilization. But the energy patterns contained in the recording fragments showed something frightening. The technological signature was human. And not only human, it was ancient. Much older than the known time of the hegemony. It was as if someone had lit, in the heart of Halcyon, a flame made of our own forgotten history. Speculation swept through the council. Some said it was a lost colony, isolated for centuries in a temporal fold. Others spoke of an experiment that had gone out of control. Artificial intelligences, perhaps, preserved too well to remember what it meant to be alive. But the most feared hypothesis came from a Martian linguist named Darius Holt. "They are not our ancestors," he said, his voice trembling. "They are our successors." The phrase spread like fire. There was in it something that no one wanted to face. What if Halcyon was the future looking at us? What if humanity, at some distant point in time, had transformed into something the present could no longer comprehend? The Hegemony Council declared a state of maximum vigilance. Fleets were moved, defenses reactivated, colonies isolated. The Keelan and the Golian, our former allies, sent observers. And, for a time, the universe held its breath. Then the transmission arrived. No noise. No interference. Clear, almost serene. Humanity, you have spread well. We observe. But expansion has a cost. Every light casts a shadow. And the shadow is coming. The voice was calm, almost paternal. But there was something in the pauses, an ancient melancholy, the weight of someone who had already seen too much. The stations tried to respond without success. The message repeated only once, with an addition that froze the blood even of the most skeptical. Prepare yourselves. They have awakened. At that same instant, gravitational detectors in dozens of systems captured a colossal wave. Space seemed to contract as if it were breathing. The blue glow of Halcyon intensified, and something began to move inside it. The human ships aligned at the border of the phenomenon. War cruisers, jump frigates, observation stations. The silence was absolute. No commander dared to speak. Then, The light pulsed one last time, and the void awoke. What emerged from Halcyon had no defined form. It was a city made of energy and fused metal, a sphere within another, rotating in opposite directions, connected by rings suspended in inverse gravity. And at the heart of that structure, signals, radio pulses, binary patterns, frequencies identical to those of ancient Earth. When the translators began to decipher them, the words appeared on the main screen. "Welcome back," the fleet commander, astonished, responded. "Who is speaking?" The answer came slowly, as if the machine itself had needed to remember how to use language. "We are what remained. You are what is left." And then the images began. Cities floating in the vacuum, inhabited by translucent human figures, bodies of light, familiar faces but lifeless. Faces that seemed made of memory, voices that spoke without sound. The readings were impossible. Each of those entities had the human neural pattern. They were ancient consciousnesses, digitized, reconstructed, repeated 1,000 times. They were people who once lived. It was then that the scientists understood. The Halcyon structure was an ark, a cemetery of preserved souls, the result of an attempt millennia ago to overcome death. Humanity, at some distant point, had decided to abandon flesh and transfer itself to metal and light. But something went wrong. What should have been transcendence became prison. They were trapped, conscious but static, eternal but unable to forget. The human fleet tried to retreat. But when they activated the jump folds, the space around bent back. Lines of energy departed from the structure, connecting ship to ship like webs. A whisper crossed all channels simultaneously. "Do not flee. We are you." Transmissions went mad. Systems began to show dates that did not exist. Messages from weeks, months, centuries in the future. The ship's cameras recorded crew members staring at screens that transmitted nothing. When the black boxes of the ships that returned were opened, there were impossible records. The captain of the Resolute Dawn, with black eyes and absent voice, saying, "We understand now. They are not our enemies. They are the inevitable result of being ourselves." The video ended with the deck lights turning off and a soft, familiar voice murmuring, "Every creation carries within itself the memory of destruction. You fought to survive but forgot the price. We are that price." Chaos took over the council. Some demanded war, others isolation. But the scientists insisted it was not an invasion. It was an echo, a reflection of humanity itself, distorted by time and by fear. A cycle. On distant planets, children began to dream of cities of light. They drew spheres and rings, always with frightening precision. When asked what it was, they said the same phrase. "It is the place where we will live when the flesh sleeps." New religions were born. Some said Halcyon was heaven, others, hell. But there was a third current, colder, more logical, that claimed Halcyon was only the future, inevitable, waiting. Power failures began to multiply in orbital stations. Before each blackout, a radio sound echoed, a baby's cry followed by a single word, "Return." It was then that President Maxwell did what few expected. He summoned an open interstellar broadcast, visible on all human and allied worlds. His voice was firm, but his gaze betrayed fear. "If Halcyon is a mirror, then we will not flee from the reflection. We will not hide from what we were, nor from what we may become. Because the true enemy was never in the stars. It was always within us." The speech united what the war had fragmented. Humans, Keelan, Golian, all sent ships to Halcyon, not to attack, but to understand. It was the greatest movement of cooperation in the history of the galaxy, and yet no one knew whether they were marching toward the end or toward the beginning. At the borders of the blue glow, the stars began to darken. The structure pulsed in silence, and when space folded upon itself, what emerged was a colossal form, a human body made of pure light. Empty eyes, serene expression, and a voice that did not come through radios but from the mind of every living being. "You remembered, and for that, we can sleep." The light dissolved into silence. The readings returned to normal, and the void of Halcyon became, once again, only space. Humanity raised a monument there, not of stone, but of pulsating energy, a living beacon emitting a single phrase to the entire universe. "We remember what we were, so that we may never forget what we may become." And when the first extragalactic colony was founded, far beyond the Milky Way, they gave it a name that echoed like a promise: Halcyon Prime. At the founding ceremony, they played an old recording, recovered from the last black box of the Eternal Resolve. The voice was that of Captain Eli. Decades passed since the awakening of Halcyon. The blue beacon continued pulsing in the silence of space, an ancient heart beating to the rhythm of the universe. No attack, no new message, only that constant presence, as if the galaxy itself breathed through it. But everyone knew, something inside was still alive, watching, remembering, waiting. Humanity changed since then. From an expanding empire, it became a civilization in contemplation. The cloning factories diminished, the military programs were archived, and the race for territories gave way to the race for meaning. It was as if, by looking at Halcyon, humans had finally understood the cost of victory and the price of forgetting. In the new calendar of the hegemony, Halcyon marked the beginning of an era. Time began to be counted before and after the awakening. The council decreed that the system would be a zone of silence. No war, no exploration, no commerce, only memory. And all peoples, even the former enemies, agreed. In every human colony, monuments of light were raised, not statues of heroes, nor temples, nor flags. Only beams of energy pulsing in synchrony with Halcyon. At their bases, a phrase engraved in 1,000 languages: "Remembrance is what keeps us human." The Keelan called Halcyon the tomb that teaches, the Golian the mirror of fire. But for humans, it was simply this: the place where the future looked them in the eyes and did not recognize them. With time, new generations were born that had never heard of Glean, of the Pankin, or of the war. Yet still, they knew what the blue in the night sky meant. Since childhood, they learned that every creation carries within itself a shadow, and that remembering is the only way to prevent it from growing. And thus, the vengeance that once united humanity transformed into wisdom. No longer, never again, touch our children, but never again forget who we are. The High Lord Avon, already old, wrote in his journal, "They faced the reflection and survived. No god has ever done that. Perhaps being human means exactly this, to walk facing one's own abyss and still keep walking." The centuries passed. Earth became living memory, preserved as a sanctuary. The surrounding stars, filled with human colonies, flourished under new names: New Kyoto, New Alexandria, New Bahia. But on all worlds, the sound of a crying baby was still respected with the same reverent silence as at the beginning of the war. It was remembrance and prayer at the same time. The sound that began it all. When the first extragalactic fleet departed, heading toward another galaxy, President Aiden Ross made the last official transmission from Earth. His voice traveled across all frequencies, crossing worlds, moons, and stations. We are not gods nor heroes. We are what pain left behind. We are made of loss and purpose. And if the void looks back, may it see in us not monsters, but memories that chose to continue. The transmission was repeated one last time before the beacon of Halcyon. When it ended, the blue glow increased for an instant, as if the cosmos itself had answered. Then silence. They say that on very cold nights, when space seems too quiet, it is still possible to hear, in the interstellar radio waves, the echo of the original message. We remember what we were, to never forget what we may become. And in the heart of Halcyon, where light and shadow meet, the universe seems to listen in silence, as if it understood, as if, for a brief instant, it too remembered. But this is only one of the many stories forgotten at the frontiers of time. If you've made it this far, subscribe to the channel Echoes of the Last Era to hear more tales of lost worlds, forbidden loves, and secrets hidden among the stars. Leave a like, share, and until the next echo.